compounds are molecules made up of more than one type of atom. When a compound is organic, it means that the compound contains carbon. One exception, however, is carbon dioxide, which is not considered organic even though it contains carbon. The four most important organic compounds are proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. These four compounds are all big molecules, which is why they are commonly referred to as macromolecules. These macromolecules are all polymers, which means that they are made of repeated units of monomers. The kind of monomers vary for different polymers. We will expand on that further in the video. We are going to talk about proteins first. Proteins are polymers made of amino acid monomers. A chain of amino acids is known as a polypeptide chain. A polypeptide chain either forms a protein or is part of multiple polypeptides that make up a protein. All amino acids share the same backbone with an amino group, NH2, and a carboxyl group, COOH, with only varying R groups. R groups are what makes the amino acids unique and gives them different properties through interactions with R groups of other amino acids. The binding of amino acids occurs from dehydration synthesis. During dehydration synthesis, the OH of one amino acid and the H of the other amino acid leaves and forms a molecule of water, aka H2O. Then the C and N forms a peptide bond. See why a chain of amino acids is known as a polypeptide? It is a polymer of peptide bonds. The peptide bonds of amino acids can be removed through the process of hydrolysis. This is the reverse of dehydration synthesis, with the water molecule being added instead of removed. We will also briefly cover the 4 steps of protein folding after the mRNA transcribing for the protein is at the ribosome site. The primary structure is the linear sequence of amino acids. This is made by tRNAs that bring the correct amino acids to their respective spots on the mRNA template. The secondary structure is when the R groups of amino acids close to each other interact. This interaction results in polypeptide folding. Alpha helix and beta pleated sheets are 2 structures that are commonly formed by the secondary structure. The tertiary structure is when the R groups of amino acids far from each other before are able to interact due to the folding in the secondary structure. The last structure is the quaternary structure. Not all proteins go through this step, however. This is when multiple polypeptides come together to form a protein. Some proteins don't go through this step, as they are made of only one polypeptide. Now we are going to talk about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are polymers made of saccharide monomers. Carbohydrates consist only of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. First, we will talk about a single saccharide, known as a monosaccharide. A little different from the other 3 macromolecules, in carbohydrates, one saccharide monomer is also considered a carbohydrate. Additionally, a monosaccharide has a fixed ratio of carbons to hydrogens to oxygens. This ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. One common example of a monosaccharide is glucose. If a carbohydrate has 2 saccharides, it is considered a disaccharide. One example is maltose, which is made of 2 glucose molecules. When the 2 molecules of glucose join together, dehydration synthesis occurs and a molecule of water is also made when maltose is made. The last is polysaccharides, which is made of more than 2 saccharides. One example is glycogen, which is made from many molecules of glucose. Glycogen is used to store glucose in animals. Many carbohydrates are used to store energy short-term to use as a fast source of energy. One exception, however, is cellulose, which is a rigid structure material used to make the walls of plant cells. There are so many words that we need to remember in biology, so sometimes it helps to recognize roots. For example, mono means one, so monosaccharide is one saccharide. Di means two, so disaccharide means two saccharides. Poly, as seen in polymers, and polysaccharides means many, so polymers are many monomers and polysaccharides are many saccharides. The next macromolecule we are going to talk about is lipids. Lipids are basically fats. Their functions include acting as a long-term storage of energy, forming the membrane structure, and playing a large role in steroid hormones. Lipids are made of hydrocarbon monomers. A hydrocarbon is one carbon atom bonded to two hydrogen atoms. There are 3 common lipids that you might see on your tests. The first one is triglycerides. This kind of lipid is one we all commonly consume and store energy. Triglycerides are made of 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol. You can remember 3 fatty acids from the root tri. Fatty acids are just long chains of hydrocarbons attached to a carboxyl group. The hydrocarbon chains are nonpolar, or also known as hydrophobic, meaning that they don't like water nor interact with it. Remember that hydrophobic and nonpolar can be used interchangeably. Similarly, hydrophilic, which means water-loving, is also the same as polar. Another common lipid is phospholipids. This is something that will definitely be on AP biology tests. Phospholipids are amphipathic molecules, which means that they have both polar and nonpolar parts. The polar part of the phospholipid comes from the phosphate head. The nonpolar part is from the fatty acid tails. Phospholipids are a huge component of cell membranes. When forming the membrane, the phospholipids form 2 layers, creating a lipid bilayer. Nonpolar phospholipid tails interact with each other, while the polar heads interact with either the cytoplasm of the cell or the extracellular matrix and outside environment of the cell. I will not go into detail in this video about phospholipids, but know that the nonpolar and polar parts are what makes the membrane semi-permeable. Another lipid commonly talked about is cholesterol. A little different from the other lipids we talked about, the hydrocarbons in cholesterol forms rings instead of chains. Cholesterol is commonly known to be bad. However, our bodies actually use cholesterol to build cell membranes. It also plays a major role in the creation of steroid hormones. As talked about earlier, hydrocarbons are nonpolar. However, since hormones need to travel through the bloodstream, which is a polar environment, proteins attach and surround the cholesterol to make it polar and able to travel through the bloodstream. The last macromolecule is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are made of nucleotide monomers and are basically DNA and RNA. Nucleotides are made of a phosphate group, sugar, and base. While the phosphate group for DNA and RNA nucleotides are the same, the sugar and base differs for DNA and RNA. For sugars, DNA nucleotides are made of deoxyribose sugar, while RNA nucleotides are made of ribose sugar. For bases, DNA nucleotides can either have adenine, thymine, guanine, or cytosine bases, while RNA nucleotides can either have adenine, uracil, guanine, and cytosine. And that is all for this video.